There are places the forest keeps for itself. Places where wind doesn't move the branches and footsteps don't echo. You walk in and something watches. Not with eyes, but with attention. Pine Hollow is one of those places. It doesn't roar. It waits. Pine Hollow was never meant to be on the map. It sits tucked within a fold of the Appalachian backcountry, far past where the paved roads end and the forest begins to reclaim its silence. The pines there are older than most buildings in the state. Tall, crooked things with needle-black shadows that stretch long and don't retreat at dusk. The locals call it the hollow that doesn't echo, and they're not being poetic. Sound there behaves differently. Veteran hikers say that your boots feel muffled on the trail, as if the ground absorbs the sound rather than returning it. Even birds go quiet near the basin's center. It's not dead silence, not exactly. It's listening silence, a kind of stillness that feels like it wants something from you. Pine Hollow wasn't always off limits. In the late 1940s, the U.S. Forest Service began carving ranger trails into the area, hoping to establish a backcountry watchpoint. Fire was a growing concern across West Virginia's remote ridges, and from a practical point of view, Pine Hollow made sense. A natural lookout tucked deep in a lower elevation bowl. By 1952, they built a single-room ranger cabin there. Wood frame, stone chimney, one door, one window facing east. No electricity, just a stove, a cot, and a cold well out back. They didn't keep rangers there long. Not for lack of interest, but because of what came back with the ones who stayed. The first was a man named Lyle Henderson. He served a short winter rotation in the mid-50s and returned looking aged, thin, and deeply private. His final report, just 7 pages long, mentioned something odd: the wind doesn't carry. I kept yelling my name into the trees, and it never came back. The second, in 1961, was Ranger Carol Steen. She lasted just 2 weeks. Her report included the line, "I didn't hear birds the whole time. Just breathing that wasn't mine." She refused to ever go back. After 1972, the station was downgraded to a seasonal watch post. From then on, only experienced personnel were allowed to volunteer, and they were only stationed there in late fall to early winter before the snowpack deepened. One ranger at a time, never more. Eventually, the stories faded from public record. As other stations were built with better access, Pine Hollow was deemed redundant, left to rot, its trailhead unmarked. But the locals never forgot. To this day, people in surrounding towns like Iron Vale and Switch Hollow don't speak much about the place. Not directly. They'll say things like, "Don't let your dog run west," or "You'll know you're close when you can't hear your own cough." Campfire talk, mostly. Dismissed by hikers, urban explorers, and amateur cryptid chasers. But the map stayed blank, and no ranger was assigned after 1987. Until Elliott Bray, a quiet man, professional, disciplined, mid-30s, divorced, no children, known for his solitude, but respected. Bray had been working backcountry assignments for 9 years before he requested the Pine Hollow post in 1992. It was late October. The fall colors had drained from the trees. Snow hadn't yet started, but the ground had gone hard, and the air carried that high-altitude hush that settles before winter speaks. Bray wrote in his request form, "I want silence. I want isolation. The usual distractions are too loud now." He brought with him only what was required: tools, a box of weather logs, notebooks, powdered food supplies, and an old red lantern that had belonged to his grandfather, a miner from Pocahontas County. That lantern would become the last known source of light recorded inside the Pine Hollow cabin. He arrived on November 1st, alone, and hiked in from the Northern Service path. The gate at the trailhead had rusted open. No one had passed that way in at least 5 years. It took him 6 hours to reach the cabin, where he radioed in to confirm his position. That transmission would be the last clear signal anyone received from him. The hollow swallowed his voice within a week. A logbook recovered later shows a meticulous first few entries. Bray noted temperatures, wind speeds, signs of animal life. A bear had passed within 200 feet of the cabin. He noted unusual mushroom growth in the southern pines. Small things, expected things. But in the margins of his third entry, he wrote something strange. "No echoes when I chop wood. Not even from the axe. Sound falls flat, as if the trees are listening." And a day later, a second silence sets in after 6 p.m. Not a stillness, more like something waiting to fill the space. He kept writing, for a while, but after day 6, the entries grew shorter. Then came the note. Whispers, 2:11 a.m. Every night now. Sounds like counting. Always ends before I can wake fully. The red lantern, according to his logs, began to dim for no reason. He changed the wick, refilled the oil. Still, it flickered. Outside, the snow came early. It said the first storm of winter reveals what's buried. And the Ranger cabin was never built to hold back whispers. Elliott Bray was not a man who feared solitude. He had served postings deep in the Monongahela backcountry, gone weeks without speaking to another person, and had written about the psychological clarity that came from isolation. To him, the Pine Hollow assignment was a reprieve, a final quiet before the heavy snows. 5 weeks alone in a forgotten cabin. No phones, no engine noise, just the stillness of the trees and the work of observation. The cabin, though worn, was functional. A cot beneath the rear window, a stove with an iron flue that creaked softly in the cold, a logbook left behind by his predecessor, water-stained but intact, dated 1987. Bray flipped through it briefly but found only 2 pages filled. Most of it was blank. A single penciled note on the back flap read, "Leave nothing open," especially after dusk. Bray thought little of it. He settled in. The days passed with quiet rhythm. Mornings were spent measuring snowpack with a marked pole he had driven into the clearing. Afternoons involved mapping rime ice patterns on the trees, part of a new frost study the Forest Service was piloting that year. His handwriting was neat, observations precise. He noted a fox den south of the cabin, claw marks at the base of a birch tree, and crows that circled but never landed. And always, as the sun dipped past the ridge, the silence came. Not natural hush, but a drawn curtain of quiet. A boundary, he wrote. At sunset, the wind falls asleep. Not slows, stops, as if it's not allowed here after dark. It was on the 5th night that the air changed. He'd gone out late to check the lock on the woodshed, red lantern in hand. The oil was full. The flame burned steady. But as he reached the 3rd pine to the east of the cabin, the light flickered once, then held. He stood still. Behind him, the trees did not sway. Ahead of him, the path faded into the dark. No rustling, no breath, just cold and the sensation of attention. Then, faint, from the tree line, 3, whispered, close, but no body to hold it. Bray turned, lantern raised. Nothing. No animals. No wind. 4. It came again, same tone, same distance. A child's voice, almost, but drained of play. He backed toward the cabin. The lantern dimmed. His boots felt heavy, as though pressing down into water rather than snow. Inside, he shut the door and bolted it. The counting stopped. He didn't write about it that night. But the next morning, he placed the red lantern on the cabin table and wrote 5 words in the logbook. Something is wrong out there. Over the next 2 days, the whispers returned. Always at 2:11 a.m. Always counting upward. He tried to record them on his tape device, but playback revealed only static. He would wake with frost on the inside of the windows, though the stove burned hot. He kept a journal separate from the official logs, a habit formed in previous posts. It was in this private notebook that he began to document the rules. Rule 1, don't count with them. He'd made the mistake once, half awake, when he heard 12. He muttered 13 without thinking. The whispers stopped instantly, and the cabin door creaked. But no one entered. The silence after was deeper than before, something more than absence. Rule 2, don't follow the echo. Bray had noticed something odd. When he called out, "Hello, who's there? Go away." The sound sometimes came back, but not as an echo. It returned with altered pacing, slower, as if someone was repeating the words rather than reflecting them. Rule 3, don't bring the red light past the 3rd tree. He had. Once. That was when the flame dimmed and the counting began. After that, he kept the lantern on the table, unlit after sunset. On the 10th day, he found the old journal. It was buried beneath a loose floorboard near the stove, wrapped in a faded flannel shirt, brittle with cold. The pages inside were weathered but legible. They weren't dated, and the handwriting changed halfway through. The first half was neat, methodical. The second half slanted erratically, with repeated lines scrawled in red pencil. They don't want you to leave. They wait until you forget the rules. Don't answer the door. even if it knocks. Bray stared at that last line for a long time, because that morning, he had found boot prints on the porch. Bare, small, as if a child had stood facing the door for hours. But no one could have reached the cabin. No tracks in or out, no disturbance in the snow. Just the prints, melting slightly in the sun. He erased some of his older notes that evening, burned a few pages of the found journal in the stove. But the flames wouldn't catch, only smoke. When he returned from gathering more wood, he noticed something chilling. The journal he had just half-burned was back on the table, unscorched. Bray did not sleep that night. Instead, he sat at the window, staring into the tree line, listening. The whispers didn't come, nor did the wind. He wrote a final note in the logbook. If something knocks, I will not open. If it calls, I will not answer. If it counts, I will not join. Then, at 2:11 a.m., he wrote nothing at all. The counting returned on the 12th night. It began the same way. Just after 2:11 a.m., a silence deeper than the usual hush settled around the cabin. Not the natural quiet of winter. This was something heavier, intentional, as if the air itself held its breath. Then came the first whisper. One. Soft. Measured. Not from a direction, but from everywhere. Bray sat up in his cot, boots already on, notebook open on his lap. He didn't breathe. Didn't move. 2, 3. The voice circled the cabin without footsteps. He swore he could feel it brush the walls, like cold smoke. He didn't respond. This time, he didn't even blink. 4. He stared at the lantern on the table. It was unlit, but the wick trembled. Then, silence. Bray waited for the next number. It didn't come. Instead, from beneath the floorboards, another whisper rose, slow, hissing, as if dragged through dirt. You forgot the rule. The rules weren't folklore. They were contracts. Bray hadn't written them himself. He had received them, first as warnings in the found journal, then as observations scribbled in his own margins. But the whispers, the thing in the hollow, had rules of its own, and it expected them to be honored. He broke one on the 9th night. He followed the echo. Half asleep, he'd called out, "Who's there?" into the trees. The echo came back, but not in his voice. It was too slow, too low, and it added 2 words, "Who's there now?" He didn't tell anyone. There was no one to tell. The cabin's radio had begun to fail by then. Static on every channel. And he wasn't sure who would believe a report like that. But in his private notebook, he had begun a second list. Not rules, patterns. The voice circles, not walks. The counting pauses when you're still. It skips 13. It hates the red lantern. That last one came from what happened on the 11th night. Bray lit the lantern again, needing light more than caution. It burned brighter than usual, brighter than any night before. The whispers stopped completely for several minutes. But something knocked. Not loudly. Not insistently. Just a tap, tap, tap on the window pane above the cot. He didn't turn. Instead, he stared into the lantern's flame, repeating to himself, "Don't answer. Don't answer. Don't answer." When he finally looked, nothing was there. No prints. No fog from breath. Just his own face reflected in the glass. And behind his face, pine needles pressed into the outside of the window, arranged in the shape of a human hand. By the 13th night, Bray had moved the cot to the center of the room. He no longer slept fully. He dozed with a pencil in hand, the lantern always nearby. But that night, something changed. The voice didn't count. It hummed, low and tuneless, like a child trying to mimic a lullaby. The kind of sound someone makes when they don't remember the words, but remember the rhythm of fear. Bray wrote, "It's not calling for me anymore. It's remembering me." That same night, he found the 3rd journal. It wasn't under the floorboards or tucked in the rafters. It was in his pack, a notebook he had brought from home, one he hadn't opened yet. But the first dozen pages had already been written in, not in his handwriting. Cramped, unfamiliar script, looping strangely. Whispers only become words when you listen. Counting only becomes summoning when you join. It has no mouth, only memory. He flipped through the rest. The final page was blank, save for one line in the corner. If it gets to 99, leave something behind. He didn't know what that meant. Not yet. At 2:11 a.m., the counting resumed. 40, 41, 42. It was faster now. Not rushed, but purposeful, as if it had waited long enough. Bray lay still on the floor, the lantern flickering. He clutched the journal against his chest and tried to remember something. Anything that would undo what had started. 51, 52. He thought of his grandfather, who used to leave small rocks stacked in a line outside the coal mine. One for each shift. So they know I'm still me when I come out. So they know I'm still me. Bray rose, slowly, the red lantern in one hand, a charcoal pencil in the other. He approached the eastern wall of the cabin, the one with no windows. With trembling fingers, he wrote, "I am Elliott Bray. I am not one of them." He underlined it 3 times. The counting paused. The lantern flared. Then a new voice joined the first. Not louder, but older. It didn't count. It whispered, but you listen like one. In the morning, Bray found the charcoal words smudged away. Not by hand. Not by weather. Just gone. The wall was clean. But beneath the door, a single pine needle had been placed. Balanced perfectly upright. Standing on its tip. He didn't touch it. He didn't write anything that day. Not in the logbook. Not in his journal. Instead, he packed a small bundle. His tapes, the red lantern, a folded page of the journal with the strange handwriting. He tied it shut with red thread from his jacket cuff. And at sundown, he stepped outside. He buried the bundle under the 3rd pine, exactly where the whispers first began. Then he returned inside and locked the door. The whispering did not come that night, nor the night after. Only silence. The silence lasted for 2 nights. No counting, no whispers, no knocks, just the sound of the stove crackling and the faint sigh of snow settling on the roof. Elliott Bray should have been relieved. But in Pine Hollow, silence didn't mean peace. It meant preparation. Something had changed. He could feel it in the trees. On the morning of the 3rd silent day, he stepped outside and noticed the pines no longer faced the same direction. Before, they stood naturally, branches open to the clearing, as if curious. But now something was off. Every tree near the cabin had subtly shifted. Their limbs no longer reached towards sunlight. They twisted away, as if turning their backs on him. He paced in circles, checking and rechecking. The trunks remained fixed, unmoved, but the attitude of the forest had changed. Even the wind felt like it passed around the cabin now, unwilling to pass through. He wrote, "It's like the trees don't want to see me anymore. Like I've become something they'd rather forget." He thought of the pine needle, balanced upright beneath the door 2 nights ago. A warning? A message? A marker? He didn't know. But it hadn't fallen over. Even after days, it still stood at the base of the door, like a spine holding a ghost upright. That night, something returned. Not a voice. Not a sound. A second lantern. It swayed at the edge of the woods, just beyond the clearing. A red light, faint and bobbing, identical to the one Bray owned. But it was sitting on the cabin table, unlit. He watched it from the window, breath held. The lantern in the trees didn't flicker. It moved smoothly, side to side, as if carried by something without footsteps. Then it paused, hung still, and turned. He knew it wasn't possible for a lantern to turn, but that's what it did. It rotated, slowly, so the lens of its light faced the cabin window. Faced him. And for one impossible moment, he saw something behind the glass. A face. Not shaped like a face, but assembled like one. Branches, snow, bark, and shadow, woven into the memory of a human expression. It didn't smile. It didn't blink. It looked, and then the lantern vanished. Not into the trees, but out, like a candle pinched between invisible fingers. Bray sat frozen for nearly an hour. When he finally moved, he found his lantern, his real lantern, was lit. He didn't remember lighting it. The next morning, tracks appeared around the cabin. Tiny, human-like footprints. Bare, no more than 5 inches long. They circled the structure in overlapping loops, clockwise, then counterclockwise, like someone had danced without music. He followed them to the edge of the clearing, where they stopped abruptly. No departure trail, no melted snow, no indication of a body turning back. Just stopped, as if whatever made them simply unmade itself. He tried to rationalize it. Thought of foxes, ice expansion, animal behavior under stress. But then he found the second journal again, the one he'd burned and buried. It was on the table, unburned, dry, open to a page he hadn't read. The ones that count don't walk. They circle. The ones that walk don't count. They look. If both happen, you are between. Bray ran his hands through his hair, shaking. He looked to the door. The pine needle was gone. Later that afternoon, he noticed the frost had retreated. Not everywhere, just in a perfect ring around the cabin, 12 feet in diameter. The snow inside the circle had melted slightly, revealing soil. But the soil was not undisturbed. Tiny handprints filled the ground, hundreds of them, imprinted deep, all facing inward. He didn't step into the ring, didn't test it. He just stood at the window and stared, heart beating against ribs like they were trying to break free. He wrote, "The forest doesn't want me gone. It wants me changed." That night, he didn't sleep, and the whispering returned. But this time, it came from inside the walls. The stove clicked softly, the red lantern dimmed, and the first whisper, clear, deliberate, spoke directly beside his ear, 61. He turned, fast. No one there. He moved to the center of the cabin, notebook in hand. 62, he covered his ears. It didn't help. The voice wasn't entering through sound. It was inside thought. It counted with his heartbeat. Matched it. 63, he screamed, "I'm not counting with you." And silence returned. Heavy, final, but not peaceful. Because the walls breathed. He watched the wooden slats expand and contract, as if the cabin itself were inhaling, drawing him in. 64. This time, he didn't hear it. He felt it. In his ribs. In his jaw. He pressed the pencil to the journal, hand trembling. But before he could write the number, his hand stopped. Someone else was holding his wrist. No one was there. But the pressure remained for several long, frozen seconds. Cold fingers. Small. Like a child's. Holding, not hurting. When it let go, the whisper came again, from beneath the floorboards. "You're almost ready." In the morning, his footprints were gone from inside the cabin. The snow hadn't fallen indoors, and yet the boards were bare. No boot scuffs, no ash trails, nothing. As if he hadn't moved at all. As if he was becoming a memory inside the hollow. He didn't write that day. He couldn't. His pencil wouldn't touch the paper. On the 15th night, the count reversed. It began, as always, at 2:11 a.m., but instead of climbing upward, the voice whispered, 99, and stopped. Elliott Bray sat upright in the center of the cabin, back against the cold stove, the red lantern flickering beside him. He waited, breath shallow, muscles locked. Silence lingered. Then, 98. The voice came again, slower than before. Measured. Final. He grabbed his journal, his hand trembling, and wrote, "It's counting backwards now. Something has changed. Something is coming." He remembered the warning from the second journal. If it gets to 99, leave something behind. But he had nothing left to leave. He'd already buried the bundle under the third pine. He'd already given his voice, his fear, his time. He had tried to follow the rules. He had tried. And now the rules were being rewritten without him. 97. The voice no longer circled the cabin. It came from inside the walls. Inside the stove. Inside the corners where light bent but didn't return. Elliott moved to the table and lit the red lantern again. It flared hot, too hot. The glass chimney hissed with steam, fogging briefly. When it cleared, he saw something impossible reflected in its curve. His own face, but older. Eyes sunken, lips moving, though no breath escaped. A version of him, not in the room, but watching from somewhere deeper, somewhere further. And in the reflection's mouth, the number, 96. That day, the forest changed again. The pines no longer bent away. They stood straight, but every branch now pointed downward, toward the soil, toward the ring of melted snow, the center of the hollow. Bray wrote, "The trees are no longer turning away. They're bowing." That evening, he opened the door to retrieve firewood and found a path had formed. Not a trail, not cleared, just a space, winding through the forest, perfectly circular, pressed down not by boots, but by presence. Like something large had glided over the snow without touching it. He stepped out only once. Just to look. The trees to either side leaned away, giving him a corridor. At the end of the path, he saw the second lantern again, swaying. But this time, it was closer. 95. That night, he boarded the windows shut, nailed them tight with splintered logs and rusted nails from the bunk frame. He burned the second journal in the stove, page by page. This time it burned properly, dark smoke curling through the flue like something exhaling after a long hold. But when he woke at dawn, the ashes were gone. The journal was back on the table, untouched, and open to a blank page. At the bottom, written in fresh red ink, a single line, "You're almost hollow." 94. Elliott began to lose time. He'd stare at the lantern flame for a moment, and hours would pass. He'd write a sentence in the journal, only to look down and see pages filled with handwriting he didn't remember. At one point, he looked in the mirror above the sink and didn't recognize his own eyes. He scratched at his neck. Pine needles fell from his collar. They hadn't been there before. Then the whispering stopped altogether. No voices, no counting, just silence again, heavier than before. The kind that presses into the ears like deep water. And that's when the knocking began. 3 soft taps. Not at the door, not at the windows. From underneath the floorboards. He fell back, knocking over the lantern. The glass didn't break. It shouldn't have, but it shattered anyway. Cleanly, without sound. And as the flame went out, the voice returned. This time, not in numbers. Just one word. Ready. He didn't sleep. Didn't move. For 12 hours, he sat in the center of the cabin, wrapped in blankets, surrounded by salt lines and charcoal marks, and every item of his own clothing tied into knots. He recited his name over and over. I am Elliott Bray. I am Elliott Bray. I am, until the name stopped meaning anything. Until it felt like a sound borrowed from someone else's mouth. At some point, he didn't know when, he stood. He walked to the door, opened it, and stepped outside. The forest was glowing. Not brightly, not with color, but with presence. A low red pulse, like the forest was lit by blood behind skin. The path waited for him, and he followed. No boots, no coat, just his notebook and what remained of the lantern. The snow didn't bite him. The cold didn't sting. The hollow had accepted him. 93, the last number he ever heard. Because after that, there was only the hollowing. The next morning, the stove in the cabin had gone cold. The firewood untouched. The journal open on the table. One last entry, written in a careful, foreign hand. Leave the door closed when you go. The trees are listening again. There were no footprints in the snow. No body, just pine needles on the cot. And a red lantern burning where there was no oil left to burn. They sent the search team on the 23rd day. No signal from Bray's radio. No scheduled check-in. No weather data transmitted. Standard policy required action after 10 days, but the regional lead hesitated. No one wanted to send someone into Pine Hollow, but protocols forced the issue. 3 rangers, Michaels, Hart, and Ramirez, set out before sunrise. The snow was shallow, the sky low and gray. They followed an old forestry map from the 70s, marking a path toward the cabin. The trailhead sign was missing, and the first mile was overgrown with vines that hadn't died back, even in winter. Hart called it a forest that hadn't learned how to sleep. By noon, they reached the outer ridge. That's when the radios began to fail. Static, then silence. The compass needles quivered at random. No birds, no echo when they tested their voices. Hart shouted a joke downhill, then cupped his ear. Nothing came back, not even wind. Michaels, the team lead, wrote later in his report. It was like the sound dropped into a pit. You could feel it disappear. As they descended into Pine Hollow, a heavy stillness settled over the group. The trees loomed tall and quiet, frost clinging to the upper branches. When the cabin came into view, the snow around it had melted in a perfect ring. No tracks, no disturbances, just bare earth and silence. The door was shut, the latch intact. Michaels knocked. No response. They entered. Inside, the air was warm. The stove glowed faintly, though no wood burned in it. The red lantern sat on the center table, flame flickering low. The cot was made. The journal was open. But Elliott Bray was gone. No gear. No pack. No boots by the door. Just a faint scent of pine and ash lingering in the air. And the walls, scratched. Not visibly at first, but under flashlight inspection, dozens, hundreds, of marks could be seen scrawled into the grain. Tiny notches. Circles. Symbols that looped and spiraled but never repeated. Some were counted. 1, 2, 3, 99, 98, 13. Crossed out repeatedly, one phrase had been etched into the wood above the stove in faint red chalk. I am Elliott Bray. I am not one of them. Hart tried the tape recorder Bray had left on the shelf. It still worked. The tape inside played static for nearly 30 seconds. Then a voice, low, dry, steady, began to whisper. It counted. Slowly. Backwards. 37, 36. They stopped the tape. Outside. The wind returned as soon as they exited the cabin. The trees creaked. A crow called once, sharp, alone. The forest shifted, the way animals shift just before a storm. Ramirez thought she saw something move between the pines, red and flickering, like the tail end of a lantern swinging out of view. She didn't follow. Instead, she reached the edge of the clearing and stopped. There, laid across a flat stone, was a bundle tied in red thread. Inside, a tape, a journal page, a folded photograph of Bray with his grandfather, and a single pine needle, balanced on its tip. Still, the team returned by nightfall. They filed their reports. The cabin was locked, the trailhead resealed, and Pine Hollow was quietly removed from future assignments. No press release, no investigation. Bray's official file reads, disappearance under extreme environmental stress. Presumed deceased. But Ramirez kept the tape. She didn't tell anyone. She played it once more, weeks later, alone in her apartment. It was different this time. Still counting, but not just numbers. After 22, the voice paused. Then whispered, do you want to know what he became? She never played it again. The red lantern was recovered, but it no longer worked. The wick stayed dry. The oil evaporated within a day of being poured. Every attempt to relight it failed. Yet each morning for 7 days after their return, Ramirez found soot on her fingers. She hadn't touched the lantern once. That spring, the forestry office reassigned all personnel scheduled to pass within 5 miles of Pine Hollow. The cabin was no longer shown on internal maps. Its coordinates were overwritten with a blank zone labeled unnavigable drainage. Local hikers reported hearing strange things that summer. Distant humming, a child's voice counting in the mist. Some said they saw a red light flickering between the trees, always just beyond reach, always swaying slightly, like it was searching for someone who would follow. The search team never returned to the area, but sometimes, on windless nights, Ramirez swears she still hears it. 12, 11, 10. Officially, they found nothing. No body, no blood, no evidence of a struggle or signs of departure. The stove was warm, the journal was legible, the cabin was intact, but nothing about what they saw fit. Michael said it best in the final line of his field log. It felt like we walked into a memory that didn't want to be remembered. The 3 rangers had prepared for a typical winter disappearance, maybe hypothermia, an injury, disorientation. The forest can swallow people, especially when snow comes early. But Pine Hollow wasn't ordinary terrain, and Bray wasn't an ordinary case. Ramirez had studied his personnel file before they left. He was quiet, yes, but not fragile. He had no history of mental instability. He'd served multiple cold weather rotations and passed every psychological evaluation. He was precise, even distant, the kind of man who finished things. But the cabin told a different story. Inside, the floor was swept clean, too clean. The stove was warm, yet no firewood had been burned. The ash pan was empty. The smoke smell in the air didn't match the stove's draft. It smelled old, settled, like a campfire from another time. The journal on the table was open to a blank page. But the page before it held Bray's last clear entry, written in tight, almost surgical print. I gave it what I could. I didn't answer. I didn't speak. But I listened. That was enough. Underneath, one word repeated several times, darker and darker with each line. Stillness. 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 Michaels found the pine needle first. It was sitting in the center of Bray's cot. Not lying flat, standing. Balanced on its tip, pointing perfectly upright. He tried to pick it up. It crumbled between his fingers. When he checked his gloves afterward, his fingertips were black with soot. But the stove had no soot. No ash. Just the faintest ring of what looked like melted wax around the base of the chimney pipe. Ramirez wandered to the window. The forest beyond the clearing felt wrong. Not menacing. Not dead. Just misaligned. Like someone had reset the world by half an inch. The trees all leaned the same way. Their branches weren't covered in snow, despite the flurry that had fallen the night before. The wind didn't touch them. They weren't frozen. Just still. She later said it reminded her of an old photograph. A moment stopped in time, but the moment wasn't theirs. When she turned to leave the window, she noticed something scratched into the wood beneath the sill. Very faint, almost invisible unless the light hit it just right. Don't count. Don't echo. Don't look for the red light. She didn't tell the others. As the team swept the area around the cabin, Hart spotted the ring. A perfect circle 12 feet across, where the snow had melted through to earth. In that circle were hundreds of tiny prints. Not boots, not paws, hands. Small, delicate, human-shaped, all pointed inward. In the center of the ring, resting on a flat stone, was a tightly bound cloth bundle, tied with red thread. It looked dry despite the melting snow. Inside were items they recognized from Bray's issue report. A torn page from his journal, a cassette tape in a plastic shell, a photograph of a man and a boy standing beside a mine lantern, a pine needle, wrapped in wax paper, and a small handwritten note. Leave something behind, or something will leave with you. Michaels ordered it sealed and transported to evidence. But no one ever filed it. That night, Ramirez stayed late in the Ranger office, transcribing her notes. She played the cassette once, just once. At first, static. Then a whisper. Not Bray's voice. Not exactly. The words came slowly, low and deliberate. The forest listens. It does not forget. It remembers you, even when you don't. Then came counting. Backwards. 1716. She stopped the tape. Ejected it. Locked it in her desk drawer. The next morning, the drawer was empty. The tape never appeared again. The Forest Service filed Bray's case as an unresolved disappearance. A 24-hour watch was placed on Pine Hollow for a month, then 2 weeks, then quietly dropped. The trail was removed from maps. The cabin's coordinates were wiped from the backcountry database. Internally, it was referred to as a classified zone. Externally, it simply vanished. But whispers never stop entirely. Over the years, hikers reported strange phenomena near the hollow's outer boundary. Voices in the fog, red lights swaying between the trees, and children's laughter with no source. Most were dismissed. Some were investigated. None were resolved. One incident, in 1998, involved a father and daughter camping 6 miles west of the old trailhead. The daughter, 9 years old, was found wandering barefoot in the snow, murmuring numbers under her breath. She was counting. Backwards. Today, the area remains officially closed. But those who live nearby know the signs. They say if you hear counting on the wind, stop walking. If you see a red lantern deep in the woods, do not follow. And if you wake to find a pine needle standing straight on your windowsill, don't listen. Because that means the hollow remembers you. And the counting has begun. There is no fence around Pine Hollow. No signs nailed to trees. No security patrols. No cameras. And yet, no one goes back. The trail doesn't end. It fades. Old maps show a service path leading to the cabin. But if you try to follow it today, you'll find only overgrown brush and a quiet that presses into your chest like snowfall. The deeper you walk, the quieter it becomes. Even the wind forgets how to move here. And the counting? It never really ends. In the spring of 1993, Pine Hollow was officially delisted from the U.S. Forest Service's backcountry site register. The public never heard of it. Internally, it was assigned a code, Zone Null. No ranger has been stationed there since Elliott Bray vanished. No surveys have been conducted. No wildlife data has been recorded. When asked, officials say the land is unstable, prone to sinkholes, dangerous for navigation, too remote for rescue. But it's not the terrain that keeps people out. It's the memory. Because Pine Hollow doesn't just trap those who enter. It holds on to what they bring in. And eventually, it sends something back. Ramirez never returned to field duty. A year after the search, she moved west. No forwarding address. In her resignation letter, she included one line not meant for the agency. We think we're protecting the land. But some land protects itself. Michaels remained with the Forest Service but refused any assignments involving winter stations. He stopped carrying a compass. When asked why, he said, "The woods near Hollow don't need to point north. They point inward." As for Hart, he left his job 2 months later. No explanation, just left a note on his locker door that said, "Do you still hear it?" There were other reports in the years after. A hunting party claimed to see a red light between the trees that moved against the wind. A photographer caught strange double exposures, images of faces where none should be. Children in nearby towns whispered numbers in their sleep and scratched pine branches into their school desks. Always counting, always starting in the 90s. No deaths, no violence, just disappearances. But that's the quiet horror of Pine Hollow. It doesn't take with force. It changes what you are until you don't realize you've left anything behind at all. Until the person who walks out isn't exactly the one who walked in. And sometimes, something else walks out in your place. In 2005, a private forestry team commissioned by a timber company was sent to survey land near the hollow's border. All GPS equipment failed within a mile. Drones lost signal. One field researcher returned pale and silent, refusing to re-enter the woods. When asked what he'd seen, he only said, "It was me, standing at the end of the path. But it wasn't me now. It was me after." He refused to explain further. Locals don't talk about the hollow, but they still live by the rules. If you hear a voice counting, don't respond. If you see a red lantern, don't follow. If a pine needle stands upright near your window, don't speak. Just wait, and hope the hollow forgets you. Pine Hollow remains closed. Not by order, by agreement. A silent pact between the land and those who remember. A space left blank so the counting doesn't have to start over. A stillness protected by absence. Some say Bray never left. That he walks among the trees, red lantern in hand, guiding others away before it's too late. Others say that's not him anymore. It's something that remembers being him. And if you're ever near those woods in winter, and the wind suddenly stops, and you feel like the trees have turned their backs on you, don't speak. Don't count. Don't echo. Because some silences are not empty. They're waiting. If that gave you chills, like the video, share it with someone who sleeps with the lights off, and hit subscribe, or the next photo might have you in it. Tap the bell. The next story drops soon.